Welcome to the DE Talk podcast. Tune in for dialogue between HR experts to amp up your HR strategies. Don't worry, we'll mix in a few laughs as we know you need it. Hello, I'm Candy Chambers, and you're listening to another episode of the DE Talk podcast. Season 2 has been filled with engaging conversations about the future of talent acquisition, whether it's human or AI-driven, disability education and accessibility, military caregivers, creation of strength-based cultures, and most recently, an episode from our Recruit Rooster team talking about employer branding and creative development. Today, we'll bring another element to the podcast as I welcome Carol Glazer, President of the National Organization on Disability, or NOD, N-O-D, to discuss the work that they do representing America's 61 million people with disabilities and the resources available to help employers put ability to work. Of course, we couldn't have this conversation without sharing a detailed look at the organization's Disability Employment Tracker, which works to benchmark a company's performance in disability and veteran inclusion. I'm happy to call Carol a friend and have watched over the years as she has transformed NOD into the country's premier resource on disability and inclusion through this Disability Employment Tracker, its Corporate Leadership Council, and its professional advisory services helping companies with talent acquisition. Direct Employers has been a partner of NOD, I always want to say NOD, since 2012, and I'm happy to say that we also participate on the Corporate Leadership Council. But I'll save that for later in our conversation. Welcome to the DE Talk podcast, Carol.
Thank you, Sandy. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm very excited about this conversation. I'm going to jump right in with some questions for you.
Terrific. Love it.
I believe we met early on in my time at Direct Employers, and I'm thankful for that because I consider you to be a friend and a true force in the disability and inclusion space. I want to start out by having you share a little bit about yourself. So tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to NOD all these years ago.
You know, I've really had a career fighting for social justice, and it goes all the way back. I'll date myself. I am a boomer,
well,
but
too.
It goes all the way back to, there we go, like-minded people. So you'll understand some of the things that happened over those years that I'll talk about when many people weren't even born yet. But in the 1960s, I became active in the civil rights movement, and it was a time of reckoning for our country around social justice issues, around issues of race and class, about the right for people to speak out for or against policies they believed in, to hold our elected officials accountable for the things that got them into office in the first place. And in many ways, it was a very positive time for this country and for our democracy. So it was a privilege to start in the civil rights movement and then move into the anti-poverty movement, which really was a direct outgrowth of that. And fast forward, and then there was the women's movement. And, I've always been privileged to be able to not only participate in those movements, but also to be to have them as part of my career. And most of my career was spent in the anti-poverty movement, fighting for neighborhoods that had been ripped apart in arson and in civil unrest in the 1960s. So that's where I started, going all the way back to the 1970s and the 1980s. Disability for me really came later in my career. I had 2 children, one of whom has both physical and intellectual disabilities. And that's really what brought me to the disability rights movement. But that really wasn't until 2005 when the opportunity came to come and help NOD. And I did that as a consultant.
Wow. Okay. Carol, you just taught me some things. I have to tell you, though, interestingly enough, when I was in college, I think I was a freshman or a sophomore, and we had Phyllis Schlafly and Gloria Steinem come and speak.
Oh, mm-hmm.
So yeah, I knew you'd know those names when you said the women's movement. My goodness, and I was a young college student, and to hear 2 opposite views of what a woman should seek to do in their lives was really eye-opening for me,
Eye-opening for sure.
It really was interesting. So, yeah, we'll have to talk about that sometime outside of the podcast.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, Candy.
That would be fun. So we recently had you participate, or NOD, participate in one of our Reach Out for Happy Hours, which is where our members learned that NOD is the oldest disability organization in the United States, which is a pretty incredible accolade to be able to tout. And I know it's evolved greatly over the years. So why don't you share a little bit about the history of the organization and what the initial goal was when it began?
Yeah. And just to continue a little bit about my history, because that is really becomes very tied with NOD's history as well. When the opportunity for me came to come and work for NOD, and I was initially enlisted as a consultant, I really thought long and hard about whether I wanted to live disability 24/7, because my son Jacob was now 28. Is somebody I've been fighting for his rights as a person with a disability, and have been an advocate for really since he was born. But when the opportunity came, I actually went home after talking to our vice chair of the board about the opportunity. I turned on Geraldo Rivera's expose of the conditions at Willowbrook State Hospital, one of the famous institutions where I knew my son Jacob would have been sent had he been born 10 or 15 years earlier than he was. That's when mothers had no other choice but to give up their children, for the most part, give up their children to go and live in these deplorable conditions that were brought to light by Geraldo Rivera, probably, if I can editorialize on his last piece of good journalism. But anyway, and he did win a Peabody Award for that segment, as well he should have. But it really became clear to me that those mothers before me had fought for the rights that my child had to live with me at home. And it was really that night and then watching that expose that made me realize that I had to go join that fight, to join with mothers and join with others to ensure a good quality of life for people with disabilities. And NOD, as the oldest cross-disability organization in the country, there are others who have been around for longer, but they're usually dedicated to one disability or another. But NOD was created in 1982, and that's almost a decade before the ADA. So the disability rights movement, following along in the wake of the civil rights movement, was really in its infancy at that point. And NOD jumped in, created by a firebrand man who had been in a diving accident and become a quadriplegic at the age of 30, and took a lot of talent and drive that he had and channeled it into the disability rights movement and created NOD. And in those early years, it was everything from fighting for curb cuts, fighting for access to buildings, fighting for access to churches and theaters, fighting for a good education. Deinstitutionalization, of course, was very much alive during that time. NOD came along as a bipartisan organization and really doing whatever needed to be done and whatever was important during those years of the disability rights movement. And it was a little bit after the beginning of 2000 that the organization looked around, used to do Harris Gap surveys by the firm of Harris Interactive, and looking at the gaps between people with and without disabilities and all kinds of quality of life indicators. The one gap that just kept repeating itself over and over is the gap in employment between people with and without disabilities. And our board, which was primarily a corporate boards like focus, the board decided to divest of everything that NOD had done prior to that and pretty much bet the ranch on the employment issue. Wow. And that's where I came along to help the organization really transform itself And it's been more than a decade. And this is a movement that is in some ways following behind many other movements. And it's been more than a decade, but I just have a feeling now that as a field and as a movement, we're coming into our own and we're ready to tackle the employment issue.
Well, you know what, Carol, I think you're right. And you actually have a very incredible board. You have a very well-positioned, a very supportive board. I've met several of them. Tom Ridge, a prior governor of Pennsylvania. You've got Robert David Hall, and I used to watch him on it was CSI, right? Yeah.
It was CSI. He was the coroner.
He was the medical director of the coroner. I loved him then, and I've met him now personally, and he's a lot of fun actually. And Luke Visconti, Luke, he's got an ornery streak to him, but he's just so much fun, and you can't help but like that.
That's why we love him.
Exactly. And Luke Visconti, I remember being at a Diversity Inc. conference actually was another affirmative action conference way back when, and he was the speaker, the main keynote speaker from Diversity Inc. How would you say that their support has helped guide your mission as it's matured?
Well, I love, Candy, that you've mentioned these individuals and who they are as people, because first and foremost, this is a group of incredibly dedicated and committed people, many of whom have a personal connection to disability, in some cases because they have their own disability, in other cases for family members. So they're very dedicated, very passionate, and unlike what many corporate boards do, they do not check their incisive questions or sometimes tough questions. They don't check them at the door when they come to a mission-oriented organization like NOG. They take those same tough questions and that same need for focus and need for results. They bring them to all the work that we do. But the most important part is that we laugh a lot. This is a board that loves hanging out together. They love having the dinners the night before the meeting. They enjoy being together. There's a lot of laughs. There's a lot of just fun. And it's so important for an organization to have that in order to thrive and hold its board members.
Yeah, and I think that adds to the trust in one another as well. Our board has a lot of fun together, but I think that trust and support needs to kind of go hand in hand, and it sounds like you have that as well. So that's
very much,
and that's incredibly important.
Respect.
And respect, exactly. So let's talk about, you guys have so many services, and I think the important thing, I want to talk first about your Corporate Leadership Council, of which we're a part, and I'm really excited to be part of that. And I know you've got several events, and obviously they've been kind of hampered with the pandemic, but I know things are still moving forward. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about the Corporate Leadership Council, like how many employers participate, what the benefits are, and how other employers can get involved?
It's a group of 50 employers now. It's a group that has grown over the last several years. When I came, there were about 20 members, so we've more than doubled, and we now seek to yet double again.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Get to 100 companies over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so listeners.
It's a place where not only is there a lot of networking, a lot of opportunities for people to learn from each other, people to profile their own work and to listen to the profiles of others and learn from them. To get free consulting services from us. Our professional services staff is among the best in our field, and we provide some of those services for free for Corporate Leadership Council members. Complete download of the Disability Employment Tracker, which I know we'll talk about a little bit. But it's a wonderful tool for a company that wants to measure its own progress in disability workforce inclusion. There's access to our members-only portal on our website. But I think the most important thing that the Corporate Leadership Council does as a group is we have the difficult conversations. We have the conversations that people are sometimes skittish about talking about openly. Yet we need those conversations because disability is still shrouded in stigma. And there's so much attitude change that has to happen before, I think people with disabilities are treated like every other member of society. So we have those difficult conversations. And the other thing we do is we talk about what's next. And in such a rapidly evolving field as we are in, we together, direct employers and NOD, working with employers to help them build a disability-inclusive workforce, we always want to talk about where the next innovation is going to come from. And that's perhaps, along with the difficult conversations, I see that as one of the most important reasons for a company to get involved with our Corporate Leadership Council.
Well, we're starting a disability roundtable masterclass, and we're focusing on major disabilities each month of the year. And that's one of the things that I've been talking about is asking those difficult questions, having the ability to ask, and I'm putting this in quotes, so you can't see it, but, the stupid questions, and not be embarrassed because you don't know. And I think that that is the most important piece, I think, of the Corporate Leadership Council, because you can ask people and they're not going to laugh at you, and you can just say, I need help, and I know I don't know the right answer to this, and please forgive me if I say this wrong, or whatever, and without being made to feel like you're, not a good human because you don't know any better. But I think that's what people need. That's what employers need, is to have a resource where they can ask the dumb questions,
Exactly, Candy. And, I think the good news story for our field is that we've managed to attract a group of employers that is incredibly generous with their time, that understands the questions that you've just raised, that understands that that people don't, people with disabilities have not been seen nor heard from in most of modern society. If you're a wheelchair user, there were no curb cuts, and again, if you had a mental health or another invisible disability, you were often sent away to an institution. And so for most of modern history, we don't have a lot of direct experience with disability. So there is a lot of questioning and uncertainty and just sort of basic etiquette questions. And the good news is, I think that there are a group of employers that have been through it, that have come out the other side, that have done it well, and they're very, very happy to share their experiences and take others by the hand and help them on this journey.
Well, you know what, Carol, this is one of those situations where I say, you know what, if things can improve for other employers, then we all win.
So true.
Because it doesn't have to be, us against them. We want every employer to hire more qualified people with disabilities. So that's where that exchange allows everybody to win. And I think that's the real benefit in all of this. So.
And some of the fiercest competitors, we have some on our own board. Some of the fiercest competitors will join together, take each other by the hand, and lead down this path of exploration and sort of this voyage of discovery. And they understand that while they may compete in the marketplace, and in some ways they compete for talent, they can also attract better talent by making the pie bigger and working together to attract even more people with disabilities into the workforce.
So let me ask, can they contact, how do they reach out to NOD and let you know if they have an interest in getting involved?
Sure. Go to our website, www.nod.org. Go to Corporate Leadership Council, and it'll take you right to the place that you can sign up or reach out to one of our staff to learn more about the council.
Or they could always contact us here at Direct Employers
or contact you.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Sure.
All right. Well, probably one of the things that I really want to have you talk about is probably my favorite tool that you guys offer, and that's the Disability Employment Tracker. And it's a free it's a free tool.
The free tool. One of the only
we
things that's free.
I know, but
left
my
anymore, right?
goodness, it's one of the most beneficial tools that is out there, and we encourage our members constantly to take advantage of this each year. Can you tell us when it was first introduced, what its purpose is, and how it differs from other similar tools in the industry? Because we all know that there are some out there. So tell us all about the Disability Employment Tracker.
Yeah, thank you, Candace. We developed this tool. The tracker is a survey. It's got about 100 questions on it. It takes about 2 hours to complete. The results are confidential. They're sent to each individual employer along with a scorecard that tells you where you are and stack up against the others in the pool. It is a benchmarking tool. We developed it about 9 years ago because I think that disability rights as a pursuit and disability as a diversity segment, we're sort of the new kids on the block. we haven't been at the diversity table for very long. We've been left out in many respects, and as we try to catch up, it becomes really important to be able to speak about measurement and numbers, and to be able to talk about disability inclusion as a business imperative, and not simply as a social justice issue, but as an issue of talent and what a company needs to do to attract the very best talent of every skill and every ability. And so we thought it was important to speak not only subjectively about workforce inclusion, but also to give employers a quantitative measure of how they stack up. And businesses love competition. They thrive on it, and they're certainly used to it. So our theory was, if you develop a benchmarking tool that allows companies to measure its progress against that of other companies, and over year, if they can measure their progress along their own trend lines, that we would be able to advance the field a lot more quickly. We started this 9 years ago. We had 20 companies and then 40 companies for a few years. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had more than 200.
Oh, wow.
That gives companies a terrific quantitative measure. It's not NOD coming in and saying subjectively, even though we think we know what's needed, but it's not just us coming in and subjectively giving our views about what an employer needs to do. It's purely quantitative. It's all about the data.
Okay. So, I mean, so they get a scorecard, like a benchmarking scorecard. Then what do they do with those results? And what do you do with those results?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the scorecard, we look, and you ask, Candy, what makes this different from other similar kinds of tools? Yes. This is strictly about workforce. It's 100% devoted to disability workforce inclusion and practices that relate to talent, practices that relate to people, practices that relate to climate and culture and strategy and metrics, and all of those areas are profiled in a scorecard that an employer gets after taking the tracker and getting the results back from us. So you get to see, along all of the questions in the survey or in a scorecard around all the different areas of workforce inclusion, you get to see how you stack up against the other 199 companies who take the survey.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Companies will still often look at the sector in which they operate. And so we have an ability to slice up the data and compare you. If you're in manufacturing, you want to see how you do against other companies in that sector. You can get that assessment from us as well. So it's a snapshot of where you are at any given point in time against others in the pool.
Okay.
Over time, what a lot of companies do is, because enough of the survey stays the same from year to year, a company can chart its own progress and its own trends year over year. A lot of companies do that, and they will use it. You can use it as a way of developing your own strategy. You can use it as a way of gaining buy-in for your agenda from other parts of the company, from senior leaders, from those in a position to allocate dollars to disability inclusion. So it gives a company its own trend and then its status against others. And then finally for us, and this is the most exciting part, I think, for me, is it gives us a sense of what's happening in the whole field. Mm-hmm. So when we take the 200 companies and we aggregate those results and we look year over year at what's happening in this marketplace, we can start seeing where the trends are. And what we've been able to do now, and this year I'm so excited about the latest development with the tracker, is that we're adding outcome measures. We're adding self-ID has been the outcome measure that we have looked at year over year. It's what federal contractors care about. It's what everybody cares about. How many people in your workforce, what percentage is willing to come forward and identify as having a disability?
Well, you know what? Yeah, I think that, honestly, Carol, I think that the most important piece of that is building the culture so that people feel okay with saying, yes, I have a disability.
Exactly.
That's the holdup. And I had to self-identify a few years ago when I went to Cardinal Health, and that gave me a real heartache because I knew if I was going to lead the compliance group, I had to say, yes, I'm a person with a disability. And I had a real hard time with that because I live with a condition. Yeah. I don't like the word disability myself. It's kind of like everybody has their own, terminology, whether it's, race and ethnicity, gender now. And, everybody has their own terminology, and I just live with a condition, and so I think that was a real challenge for me. But, if your company is open and accepting and makes you feel like you're no different from anybody else, that makes all the difference in the world. It really does.
Exactly. I think you've really put your finger on something important, because I'll give you a data point. About 65% of the companies who took the tracker survey last year reported that they had a self-ID campaign going on at some point in the year. And that's a big number, and it's expensive. Self-ID campaigns are very expensive. Oh, yeah. Less than 50% of the companies who had these self-ID campaigns reported increases in self-ID as a result of the campaign. So you've got expensive campaigns. Almost 2/3 of the companies in the pool mount them, and fewer than half report success. Now, why is that? And it gets back to what you're talking about, Candy. It's about trust. It's about, does an employer only come forward and want to know who I am once a year during a campaign? Or does an employer really want me to bring forward who I am, help me get the accommodations I need, not judge me and not negatively sanction me because I have a disability?
Well, I'm a real fan of bringing your whole self to work, whether it's whatever characteristic a person might have as part of themselves. I'm a huge fan of bringing your whole self to work. So let me ask you about one other piece of the tracker. Once the tracker's completed, The employers that participate are considered for the NOD Leading Disability Employer Seal and also the Disability Inc. Top 50 Companies for Diversity program. So why don't you tell me about that designation, what those acknowledgments mean, and how they get there?
Sure. Diversity Inc. has made taking the tracker survey a requirement for any company that wants to be considered to be in its top 50 companies for diversity.
Okay.
It's a very, it's kind of a coveted award. And usually, until the pandemic, it's awarded at a gala at Cipriani's in New York with a red carpet and everything. And
I've been there. Yeah. Okay.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful celebration of the beauty of diversity. It's just wonderful. I feel very privileged to have been able to go and to announce the top 10 companies for disability every year.
Wow.
So that's Diversity Inc. What NOD does, though, with tracker takers who will opt in, and most tracker takers will opt in, is we award the Leading Disability Employer Seal to the top quartile of all companies who take the tracker.
Okay.
And we only award it to the top quartile because we want it to be competitive.
And elite.
We want to only reward the very, very top companies in disability workforce inclusion. And we knew that if that was our goal, we had to be pretty selective, and we knew that we could not make the award to any more than 200 companies are taking it. No more than 50 will win the seal.
Okay.
So by definition, it's very competitive, and it's something that it gives employers a goalpost for those who really want to be leaders among their peers.
So, Carol, is there any requirement to take the tracker or to be considered for any of these awards? I mean, does it have to be a company of a certain size, or can any company take it?
Any company can take it. It usually winds up that it's larger companies who have the investments in systems that it often takes. For example, if you want to track the number or percentage of applicants for jobs who have a disability and who disclose a disability, and of course as a federal contractor you're required to ask, it turns out that it's larger companies often who have the capital to invest in those types of applicant tracking systems.
Okay.
But more and more smaller companies are doing it, and more smaller companies are taking the tracker, and that's a very exciting development for us because we know that's where so many of the jobs are, is in smaller businesses. And it's nice to have a free tool that we can offer to a smaller company who doesn't have the investment it takes to get highfalutin when it comes to disability workforce inclusion.
Oh yeah. It's when I look at where we were 20 years ago to where we are today, the improvements are massive. But I was just having a conversation right before we sat down to do the podcast. I'm that person that no matter how good you are, you can always be better. you know, and that's no matter how good companies get at building their culture, creating disability inclusion, creating diversity inclusion. And to me, disability inclusion is part of the bigger diversity and inclusion piece.
Yes, and it's heartening, and I don't know if this has been your observation as well, Candy, but we're seeing some spillover from the heightened awareness of inequities in this country around race and around class. We are also seeing a heightened sensitivity, especially when you combine that with a greater acceptance of telework now, which is something that we in the disability community have been fighting for years. Suddenly it's become, oh yeah, of course. Before it was, no, you have to look people in the eye. You have to have human contact. Now it's, oh yeah, you want to telework? Fine.
Do you know what? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead,
I was
Candy.
just going to say when the Section 503 regs and the VEVA regs were updated in March of 2014, I sent a letter to the OFCCP and recommended that they put something in their FAQs about remote work and listing jobs for remote workers. And I still have the email, and I said remote work is absolutely perfect for people with disabilities, especially people who need additional care to get ready and things like that. Because there are those folks who are perfectly capable of working, but just their caretaker has to be considered as well. And for remote work, it's brilliant. It's brilliant, So hopefully that will be another big improvement as a result of this pandemic that has certainly changed our lives,
Yeah. I do think it's one of the silver linings there. And then you have smaller things like people who are blind who are saying for the first time they can read a menu in a restaurant, right? Because the pandemic necessitated scanning the menu into your iPhone.
Oh, I think that's brilliant.
And then you can use a screen reader. And who thinks about what it is like to walk into a restaurant and have to have somebody else read the menu to you?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what independence is about, is not having to have that. And so, there are so many unseen advantages or silver linings, I guess, that the pandemic has brought. And one of them, I think, is just a heightened awareness of inequities generally, not just around race, but generally.
Oh, right. No, I wholeheartly agree. I really do. Let's talk about another service you offer, and it's called the Disability and Inclusion Executive Briefing. So that gives you a customized plan based on your tracker results. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that program, Carol?
Sure. If you're at the entry level and you're not at the point yet of making an investment, you can learn a lot from the scorecard. But what the scorecard doesn't give you, that is the tracker scorecard, what it doesn't give you is a plan with priorities, with short, medium, and longer term goals. It doesn't give you quantitative goals to set for yourself. And many companies find it helpful to have us come out and sit with them, and oftentimes groups of people that they gather that include legal and compliance and communications, as well as HR and DEI. But that can bring people together and use the tracker to set a plan in place. And that's really what an executive briefing is.
Okay.
It takes the results and it translates them into a customized template, really, for a plan for a company.
And that's a
not
personalized.
Expensive.
Okay, it's a personalized
Yeah.
plan for that particular company, then, right? And that you
Yes.
say there is a charge, but it's not expensive, so that would be probably money
That's
very
right.
well spent.
It is money well spent. It can save other money. I just gave you a piece of data about tracker campaigns. About self-ID campaigns.
Oh yeah.
And, you can save a lot of money by investing in other types of activities that promote trust among your workforce that will help people feel safe coming out and identifying with a disability.
Okay.
So it can keep you out of trouble in some ways, prevent investments that might not yield results, while also giving you a positive plan for the future.
Well, it sounds like a no-brainer to me. So I'm going to make sure that we really push this in our Disability Roundtable Masterclass and also in our e-news for our members, and we're going to push this even more this year.
Terrific. That's terrific.
Yeah, so we always kind of try to take care of our friends at NOD, and I know you guys do the same for us. So.
Oh, and you're wonderful. I hope your employers know how wonderful you are, Candy. Your leadership, and it's a very human, very empathetic, but very insightful kind of leadership. I hope your members appreciate that.
Oh, thank you,
what they have in you and in the organization, and the talent that you attract.
Oh, well,
Always superb.
I couldn't do it without the team that we have at DE.
Yeah.
I'm pretty fortunate. So, but thank you very, very much for your kind words. That was unexpected and very much appreciated. So, I wanted to mention I don't know if you read our week in review. I hope you do. But recently we just in our one of our blog posts we featured the disability employment maturity curve. So
Yeah.
if you were to break down the demographic from exploration to competitive advantage, what stage would you say that most employers that you work with start in initially?
Yeah. And the other beauty of having the aggregate results that we have in the tracker is we can look at the field as a whole. And I can tell you that the four stages are exploration, compliance, competence, and competitive advantage. And I'm going to say as late as 3 or 4 years ago, most companies were somewhere between exploration and compliance. It wasn't that long after the 503 rule change had been put into effect. So it's taken some time as a field for companies to move from exploration to compliance. But I think where we are today is much closer towards competence. And that is beyond compliance. We're doing more than just checking boxes. We're doing more than simply setting goals for ourselves. But we're moving to a place where it's a C-suite topic, where there are ERGs in place that have the resources where they can really get some things done, where there are specific hiring targets and specific relationships with the disability sourcing agencies that can help you meet your talent needs. All of that goes into competence. And I'm thrilled to see as many companies as we have that are moving much closer towards competence. Where we have to go next, of course, is competitive advantage. When a company understands that this is not just about inclusion because it's a good thing to do, but where they understand that it's an important investment to make in a skilled and able workforce. And that's where you get the competitive advantage.
Well, it increases their
That's
bottom
where
line. It increases their bottom line. And that's
exactly.
right there's a dollar value added to your bottom line, and that's a competitive advantage. So.
Yeah. HR has so often been relegated to being a cost center and not a revenue
a necessary
center.
evil, as I said to someone earlier today.
Unless it's what?
A necessary evil.
A necessary evil, exactly. But like all necessary evil, you're not going to put a lot of time and money into it. But I think more and more companies are seeing acquisition of diverse talent as a bottom line issue. And we don't even have to prove it. We don't have to spend a lot of money showing the correlation anymore, the correlation between profitability and doing the right thing by your workforce. So as that becomes more common and more accepted, we're going to see more and more companies moving higher up the maturity curve.
Well, it's funny because years ago it used to be, disability wasn't really important to the C-suite until, if it was a male, his wife developed breast cancer, or if it was a woman, she developed breast cancer, or, had a family member with some form of disability. But that is gradually changing, and it's not something that people in the C-suite are ignoring any longer. At least that's what I'm seeing. And I receive questions all the time about ERGs. And, I always talk about, having an ERG where you don't just limit it to people with disabilities, for instance, or just veterans or whatever, but include advocates of those various characteristics, and I have lots of huge wonderful stories to tell with our disability advocates network that we had at Cardinal Health, and people that were part of the organization, and asked me about recruiting diabetics because they knew I had diabetes, and it's interesting how much information sharing goes on in those types of organizations, and the activities that people in ERGs can take on. And you know, I just think that there's so much to be learned from each other, like we talked about earlier, you know,
Yeah.
and so
Correct.
hopefully we'll move
And,
forward. Go
I
ahead.
have a psychiatric diagnosis. I was diagnosed 8 years ago with post-traumatic stress
Oh,
disorder, and it's
wow.
something that I have sort of combated for a good part of my adult life. And it's very common, as it turns out, with mothers of children who have chronic medical issues and are in and out of the hospital a lot, as I have been with my son Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we talk about what's coming as the issues of concern in the disability field, I think mental illness is very fast becoming one of the big ones. And I use the term mental illness intentionally. We tend to talk about mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a difference between mental health and poor mental health and a diagnosable physical mental illness. And I think part of the reason we talk about mental health is it's less stigma.
Stigma.
It's less,
Exactly what I was just going to
right?
say.
I've done a lot of writing about this because, parental PTSD is a thing. It's a diagnosis. About 30% of all children in this country will have some type of acute medical issue for which they'll be hospitalized. And half of their mothers will have either anxiety or depression, a combination, or post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a phenomenon that we've become increasingly aware of through the pandemic because so many women are caregivers, and they're trying to work at home at the same time. But it's really been sort of a little-known phenomenon, and many of us who experience it feel ashamed, or we feel that, it's nothing compared to combat trauma. You look at veterans who are coming back from the wars, and they're the ones who really have trauma. My son being in the hospital, in and out of the hospital, doesn't measure up. Well, you know what? It does.
And
it takes its toll.
And it's a personal thing. And, it's like you can have a car accident and get post-traumatic stress or TBI. It's
Exactly.
just on how you respond to various things that are, that you have to face or that you have to deal with. So, that's why I say some of the disabilities that we're focusing on this year are meant to help employers, know how to address various issues like post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury. So, wow. So let's skip forward here. We just signed a letter of support with NOD for a research proposal, and hopefully you can share a little bit about the potential research opportunity and what that would mean.
Well, we're so excited about this, Kenny. We're so thrilled that Direct Employers has signed a letter of support for it. This is a 5-year research grant, and we have gone in with a proposal, joined with Syracuse University, the Burton Blatt Institute. Peter Blank's a very well-respected disability employment researcher, and Doug Cruz, who is at Rutgers University, also has done some tremendous research. And the opportunity here is to link practices to outcomes, meaning we pretty much have a good idea of what we think works in order to expand your disability workforce and to better support those with disabilities who are already there. But we have no definitive way of pointing to the practices that get the best outcomes. And that's the benefit of research. This is a 5-year grant, so we'll be able to go in and look through the tracker at the companies who have good outcomes and be able to correlate the practices that lead to those outcomes. But it's only a correlation, so we will not be able to say for sure, if you have a centralized accommodations fund, you're going to get more people coming forward asking for accommodations and therefore performing better. We just think it's true, and we can see some correlations. What this is going to enable us to do as a field is what so many other fields have done, whether it's education or healthcare. You have actually, we talk a lot about evidence-based. This is going to enable the field, for the first time ever, to accumulate the data and draw the correlations and draw the, I don't want to use prevalent research terms, but causation, and really show if you do X, you're going to get better engagement, better advancement, longer term retention, and better attraction of people with disabilities to apply for your job. And that's what employers want.
Well,
they want definitive data.
Exactly. And I tell our members all the time, you are legally able to focus or target your hiring on people with disabilities, because disabilities don't discriminate. You'll find every protected class in the disability space. Every single one. And you'll get veterans too. I mean, you get every single category. So this is just going to be a shout out again to get in there and take that disability employment tracker, because even future results could rely on what you find. So I think you're in a similar situation with NOD as I am with direct employers. What would you share as far as the next steps for NOD? What's next on the horizon for you guys?
Well, we have 8 years worth of data from the tracker now, and that data is a gold mine in being able to advance the state of practice for employers. And so we are redoubling our efforts to take that data and really start pushing out what we can learn from the data that help employers better pinpoint their investments in disability workforce inclusion. So that's one big piece, and that's where this research grant fits in, and other research that we're doing in partnership with a wonderful HR data analytics firm called Talmetrics.
Oh, yeah.
But the second thing that we want to do is we really want to double. We want to get to not 200 companies taking the tracker, but 400. And we want to get from 50 companies in our Corporate Leadership Council to 100. It's a very small number when you think of the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 1000, and it's a relatively it's very cost effective and relatively inexpensive way for companies to advance along the curve. So those are the two big ones. We want to deal with the digital divide, which has become clearer now during the pandemic and with an increasing reliance on technology. We've seen the limitations of Zoom and other technologies that are likely to stay after the pandemic. And we want to deal with mental illness in the workplace, because we know that's going to be on the rise as well.
I've reminded our employees every month at our monthly staff meetings, to take advantage of our EAP. And I constantly tell them, I don't see the results, I see the numbers, and they have increased. But it's for employees, it's for families, and it's free. So if you're having issues with, I know I'm very extroverted, but I don't have, I don't deal with anxiety or depression, but boy, I can see that if you already, and even if you don't, you might get, to a point where you just have to talk to somebody, or something. So, and there's no shame in that. And I think that that's where I try to remind people, take advantage, get the help that you might need, because, sometimes it's just having somebody to listen, and to just say, you're not alone,
If you're in a position in a company where you're responsible for the EAP, or you're investing in the EAP, make sure the people in the EAP are adequately trained to diagnose mental illness, to know where to send people. Yeah. They're not necessarily going to be the psychiatric help that you need, or the psychotherapeutic help that you need. I'm not psychopharmacological. Isn't that a great word? Well, that's a big word for medicine.
Yeah, it's one of those words that,
But
they write it out and it's like, okay, how do I say that again?
right. But fortunately, it's very inexpensive to treat mental illness nowadays between therapy and between medicine. The EAP cannot really take care of all of those needs, but they certainly, if they're well trained and they can recognize and spot and diagnose, they know where to send you.
Exactly.
Just make sure that they're adequately trained.
Yeah, get you the help that you need, or at least direct you in the right area. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, Carol, this has been so much fun connecting today. We do a fun activity at the very end of our podcast, so and to end it on a high note. So we like to incorporate a little fun into the mix of education.
Sounds good. I've been having fun. I don't know about you, Candy.
Oh, I have. I'm sitting here smiling to myself. So, but I'm going to ask you 5 rapid-fire questions. So I'm going to just ask you a simple question, and all you need to do is just say the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. What's the most important thing you've learned in life?
You got to go slow to move fast.
Ooh, I like that. Where do you derive inspiration?
My son Jacob, whose test says mildly mentally retarded on standardized IQ test, but he's one of the smartest people I've ever known.
I knew you were going to say your son. I knew that. So that's good. Good for you. Okay, early bird gets the worm or complete night owl?
No, anybody who knows me, and you're one of those people, Candy, will see 3 a.m. on emails, it's night owl. Unless you want to call that early in the morning.
That was a good answer. I like that. Okay, what's your favorite thing about your career?
Oh, it's the people. And someday, Candy, this is another one for later, but I was sent in 1985 to hire Barack Obama to work for the anti-poverty organization that I worked for. I sat across the table from him, and I offered him a job, and he flatly turned me down because he said he had bigger plans. And I got to tell him that story in 2013.
Seriously?
So, people like that have been in my life, and I'm so fortunate.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. I like that. I like that a lot. So last but not least, are you an introvert or an extrovert, Carol?
Are you kidding me? I haven't stopped talking on this whole phone call. You guess. What do you think? You and I are the same.
Exactly. We're both extroverts, so that's probably why we get along so well.
I bet it is, Kenny, for sure.
Oh, gosh. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Carol. It's been a pleasure participating in NOD events and becoming a part of the Corporate Leadership Council. And as a person with an invisible disability myself, I see your work as truly inspiring and done in a manner... I mean that. I really do. And the work that you do is done in a manner that allows us all to learn from one another and grow together as a community. NOD,
and you're not even reading that.
Bits and pieces, but you guys offer so many opportunities to advance disability inclusion for employers within their organizations, and for those who are listening, I highly encourage you to connect with Carol and the team at NOD to do just that. If our listeners would like to connect, how can they get in touch with your team, Carol, to start those conversations? Just by going to nod.org. Okay, all right.
Go to contact us.
Okay. I strongly recommend that they do that, and we have a lot of people that ask a lot of questions about what to do with regard to employees with disabilities, or how to learn about disability etiquette. And I know that Howard Green is one of my favorite people on the earth, and he's now retired but still doing some consulting for you. And I know that he did training for the United Nations on disability etiquette, correct?
Yeah, he did, for sure.
Yeah, so this is the group to talk to, folks. So, all right, Carol, I'm going to let us end up with that high note, and I truly love this, Carol. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the DE Talk podcast. Stay connected with direct employers on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive notifications of new episodes each month.